Generosity is good, right? The science tells us this, but we don't need science to know it, because when we're generous, we feel good. When people are generous to us, it feels good. And when we see other people's generosity, that also feels good. And it motivates us to be generous too. But how does generosity work? Where does it go wrong? How can we encourage it to thrive? These are questions I've been sitting with, and I want to offer some opinions and reflections. I'll link to some theory, but I'm also very much speaking from my own experience. I'm not making a formal argument as much as I'm sharing a perspective that might resonate. My thesis goes something like this. We should move away from seeing generosity as a trait, that is, oh, he's a generous person, or an act, oh, what a generous gift. Instead, I want us to look at generosity as a kind of transformational context, a collective way of being that doesn't live inside individuals as much as it's something that individuals live inside. And along the way, I want to explore 4 ideas. 1, that much of what we call generosity isn't really generous at all. 2, that genuine generosity transforms who we are, not just what people have. 3, that generosity can only survive with boundaries and clear requests. And 4, that choosing generosity is a beautiful kind of courage. So let's look at generosity as a context. There's an anthropologist, Fiske, who spent decades mapping out how humans relate to each other, and he has a theory called relational models theory, where he puts forward that we relate in 4 fundamentally different models. That is, there are 4 ways of being together that are qualitatively different and operate with different rules and conventions. In authority ranking, we are ordered and ranked, and those ranked higher get more and decide more, and that is accepted as legitimate. This is how we relate in a lot of organisations or institutions where seniority matters. You see, the professor rightly has more authority than the teaching assistant. This is authority ranking. In equality matching, we take turns. Resources are split evenly and we keep a track so that everything balances out. This is how we relate in clubs or communities where fairness really matters. Everyone gets 1 vote regardless of who they are. This is equality matching. In market pricing, we value what can be counted or quantified. An exchange is governed by price. This is how we relate when we're buying and selling, where finding the right ratios and rates for things matters. You see, you get rewarded depending on the value you bring, and this is market pricing. 4th is communal sharing, and this is where we're in it together. What's mine is yours. We give according to need because identity and belonging matter more than any keeping of accounts. This is how we relate to our nearest and dearest, regardless of who they are. In our family, we look after our own. This is communal sharing. My take is that generosity can be thought of as creating a context for communal sharing way of relating without the hard boundaries and long-term commitments of family. So a newborn child would enter communal sharing permanently and should always know that their needs will be met. But with generosity, we're offering this kind of relationship to some people, to some degree, for some purposes and for some time. So it's got a boundary. With generosity, you don't family everyone, but you can family anyone. And in this way of looking at generosity, if generosity is really a covert way of gaining status, you're playing authority ranking and it isn't generosity. So this is the Bible story of the rich man making a public show of how much he gives and Jesus refusing to count him as generous. Or if generosity is a moral or practical obligation to redress some unfairness, you are playing equality matching and that isn't generosity either. You see, giving from a sense of duty might be a good thing to do, but it's not generous. Or if generosity is rigorously accounted for so that we can balance everything out, then this is market pricing and it also isn't generosity. So think of how it feels when a family member keeps too close a tally on the exact cost of each gift they give and receive and only gives what they've received. Like, each of these, right, has an off feeling. They're breaking the code of the context. And when we mix modes, that mixing creates a sort of incongruence, and we feel this as sticky or bad, even if we can't name what is bad about it. See, generosity doesn't demand specific acts. You can be generous with encouragement, with time, with connections, with money, with skills, because generosity isn't the exchange, it's the relationship you're invited into from which the exchange naturally flows. And experiencing generosity from any perspective, whether as a giver, receiver, or a witness, it is heartwarming. And a warm heart is a wonderful thing. So it is no wonder that generosity spreads through social groups like wildfire. Generosity doesn't just move things around, it moves us around, transforming who we are. And so who do we become inside this context called generosity? Well, every major religious tradition treats generosity as central to a good life, and not just because of what it distributes, but because of what it does to the giver. Generosity purifies and transforms the mind, the heart. Buddhist teachers traditionally live by dāna, offering everything freely and accepting only what is freely given. And I took a brilliant introduction to meditation course with Mark Overland, who still lives like this, where everything is freely given. And when I first encountered it, I found it quite hard to navigate. Like, how much should I pay? What's fair? But what I came to appreciate is that dāna is not a pricing strategy or a way of positioning value. It's an invitation to a very different way of being that doesn't place value on price. Now, the same insights runs through other traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, as well as a lot of secular ethics. Loosening our grip on what we have changes who we are. Or as St. Francis of Assisi put it, it is by giving that we receive. But if generosity has this kind of power, it can also be exploited. And the history of religion and plenty of other institutions is littered with examples of communities that used the language of warmth and wholehearted giving to extract. This is the tele-evangelist who grows rich from the donations of the poor faithful, the community that coerces its members into giving more than they really can, the influencer who manipulates their followers. These are not generous ecologies, they are leveraging authority to extract. But if this is obviously bad in its extreme manifestations, it can be harder to see in the messy day-to-day. See, when are we encouraging generosity and when are we asking too much of people? When are we being coerced and when are we just bearing the natural discomfort of giving, of time, attention, skills, whatever? You see, personally, I have an example where I asked too much of an artistic collaborator on a project and only years later discovered the hurt that it had caused. If we want to encourage and benefit from generosity, we're going to need to develop more skill and sensitivity than I showed back then navigating these questions. So let's look at giving and receiving as a skill. I was introduced to this via my friend Adam Tafler, who is a practitioner in Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent. And this is a model, and it starts with a simple observation. In any exchange, a hug, a gift, a favour, there are two questions to ask. First, who is doing the thing? And second, who is it for? Now, those two questions are independent of each other, and that independence opens up four distinct positions rather than the usual two. We normally think of a giver and a receiver, but this complicates that. So let's just take an example. I'll give you a hug can actually mean two quite different things. The first is I want to offer you the hug that you want. So I'm doing it, I'm the doer, but it's for you. In Wheel of Consent language, I am serving you with a hug and you are accepting or welcoming my service. But the second option is I want to have the feeling of hugging you. So I'm the doer, right? But it's for me. Here, I'm taking a hug and you're allowing me to hug you. Now, both of these might be very welcome, but they're different. And in this way of looking at it, wholesome giving and receiving blossoms when these are understood. The language is a little awkward at first, but for me, it opened up a much richer way of thinking about exchanges in all aspects of my life. You see, it's the same with generosity as I just described with a hug. If my giving is really for status or payback, it's actually a kind of taking disguised as serving. I'm doing something, transferring time or money, but it's actually for me. I want to receive the benefits. And like with the hug example, where there's a mixed motivation, it can create a feeling of ick. The wheel of consent also helps us distinguish obligation from genuine serving. You see, on the wheel, the shadow side of serving is being a martyr or a do-gooder, where I'm giving because I can't bear to disappoint or because I think I should, giving because I feel a real or perceived pressure to give. You see, this also poisons generosity. In all of this, generosity is as much about the posture with which something is given as the specific thing given. And the wheel of consent gives us quite a nice way to check our posture honestly. This lands us on the value of clean requests, of asking without necessarily expecting and being asked and responding. This is a vital skill. See, a genuine ask only actually wants a yes if it is wholehearted. And a no is not seen as a rebuke, but as a gift. It's like a treasure, because clarity is kindness. And so asking well is itself a generous act, because it treats the other person as someone with their own agency, capability, and the relationship as important. So this is not just seeing people as a resource to be accessed. And when we know that people won't feel obliged to say yes to us, we're actually freed up to ask for more of what we want without fear of overstepping the mark into entitlement. And this can move us towards a wholehearted generosity that doesn't have obligations baked into it. And this is the orientation that actually builds and nurtures generosity as a space we can live in. I've recently been giving my time to a project that I really like and believe in, and I've enjoyed helping them with their future plans. But at the start of the year, I noticed something subtle in me shift. It was a faint drag, a little reluctance, the whisper of, I think I'm giving more than I can freely give right now. And I actually mentioned it to them and they completely understood. And my relief was interesting. It was immediate. And I felt this big wave of gratitude. You see, there was no room to be taken for granted or resentful because I'd expressed myself before all of that had hardened. And knowing that there was freedom to pull back made me want to give more a few months later, because that is what boundaries do. They're not limits on generosity as much as they are creating the right kind of container for this powerful force to flow. Nick Cave was writing to a fan and he described hope as a warrior emotion. So not something passive or soft, but adversarial and hard-earned, a way to lay waste to cynicism. And generosity works the same way: to be generous when you could be cautious, to give when you could withhold, to trust when you could protect yourselves. These aren't easy choices. They push back against a world that is very good at teaching us to keep score, to build our status and only do what we must. Choosing generosity is declaring something powerful about yourself, about the relationship, and about the world. It says, I am already abundant. We are blessed by this opportunity to give, to be generous. And what we are generous towards is worth giving ourselves to wholeheartedly. In the end, rather than an obligation that costs us, living inside generosity is a generative force. It takes courage, but it brings with it a flood of aliveness into ourselves and into the world. And don't we need that?